How's it, guys? Welcome to Data with Clarence. Today, we're going to be covering the second episode of the PL-300 certification, which is Module 1, where we're going to be looking at getting started with Microsoft Data Analytics. Now, in this module, the things that we're going to be, or the subtopics we're going to be covering are discover data analysis, which is more like the foundations of data analysis, getting started with building Power BI, and getting started with Copilot, which is sort of a new addition based on how Copilot is being used within the data space. But before we get into the detail, I've got a very special announcement. So finally, the exam prep notes are now available on my PayHip store. So if you guys want them, I'm going to drop the link on the description of the video or on the chat for you guys to access the exam prep. So it also has a summary of the content plus an exam sort of practice for you to prepare before the exam. Now, without wasting any time, let's get into it. Now, in terms of what we're going to be covering under today's topic, which is discover data analysis. Now, we're going to look at what exactly is data analysis. We're going to cover the types of analytics. We're going to look at the roles in data, and we're also going to look at the tasks of a data analyst. Now, what exactly is data analysis? Now, before putting any words, what I sort of did is to do an illustration to sort of show you what data analysis actually looks like. Now, I took a data set early today and I sort of got the understanding of what the data set is about, look at the columns, what exactly data is in this data set. Then I downloaded this and then I added that into an Excel document where you can now see what exactly is on this Kaggle sort of retail data set. Now, by looking at this, I can assure you, you cannot derive meaningful insights because you can see there's a lot of numbers. You can't tell me how much sales in total have been made. You can sort of see that majority of the sales are made when the holidays falls, but how much has been made you can't really say, and whether which one has the most sales is really hard to say. And if you look at the date column, you can also see that the data is quite messy, so someone has to really put that into the correct format so that it aligns with the rest of the data sets. Now, what I did with this data, I cleaned this data, fixed the whole date issues and formatting, and converted this into this visual. Now, from this visual, can you see that we can tell that the total weekly sales for the period is 7,300,000. And we can tell that the department that is making the most money is Department 2, followed by Department 4. And we can see that Department 5 is at risk. It could be that something needs to be done to ensure that Department 5 is back up to the game, or we could be closing the store. Now, if you look at the overall trend, you can also see that overall the company seems to be losing sales as the data actually says. And you can see that clearly the company makes more money when it is not a holiday. So a holiday really seems to be the period where the company doesn't necessarily make money. So these are valuable insights. By just presenting this to the stakeholders, they're already thinking about certain things. Oh, we need to do something about that's the department 4. We need to do something about this sort of decline in sales that we're experiencing. Can we increase revenue during holidays? Is there a way for us? Clearly there is revenue, but what can essentially be done? Now, this is essentially data analysis, taking data from whatever source, converting it into meaningful insights, cleaning it, and building these insights that companies can make decisions on. Now, a company cannot make decisions on this Excel document as it is, but with this, we can start to strategize to see how can we increase revenue in other departments. We can now see where we should be focusing our attention or resources, and all the overall strategy of the company can be seen whether we need to start expanding on marketing projects. So essentially, that is what data analysis is. Now, with that understanding, if you were to look at the definition, this says data analysis is the process of exploring, cleaning, transforming, and interpreting raw data to make it useful for decision making. Now, if you think about what we just did, this is exactly what we've just did. We took the data as it was, we turned it into meaningful insights. Now, from that, the marketing team, the business leaders can start making decisions or making plans to ensure that they protect their business from any harm. So essentially, that is what data analysis is. And a data analyst is the person who does all of this. So, in essence, that is what data analysis is, and that is what a data analyst does. Now let's look at the types of analytics. Now you probably have heard that there's things like a descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, predictive, prescriptive, and there is now artificial intelligence. So what exactly are these, and do they even have value? Now to look at them in detail, when we talk about descriptive analytics, we're talking about what happened. So this is really a summary of what happened. For example, sales of 2024. By looking at sales of 2024 or by visualizing the sales of 2024, you are telling us what happened. So that kind of analytics is called descriptive analytics. The second part of it is your diagnostic analytics. This is where you explain why something happened. Why did we have that amount of sales last year in 2024? Or why did sales in 2024 drop in May? So it's really about answering those questions. So you really interrogate the data and try to see what is causing the decline in sales. Now, the third one, this is now your predictive analytics, right? So, predictive analytics, this is really more on using data to predict future trends or future outcomes. So, based on 2024 sales data in winter, we're more likely to make 20 million. Now, there's a lot of data that would have been utilized to back up this conclusion. So predictive analytics, this is how sort of like companies plan for potential resourcing next year and all of that. So that's done through predictive analytics. And then prescriptive analytics, this is when you recommend actions, right? So our sales are declining. What is going to increase our sales? What can we do? If we have sales that are heavily increasing in the area of Johannesburg, maybe to maintain that level or to even broaden them, we need more stores at different locations. So something like that. That's where you recommend. That's where you try to find answers to what is the solution exactly. Now, the last one, artificial intelligence. Now, this is really a type of analytics where we sort of look at how can we use AI to answer more complex questions using our data. Can we build models on top of our data to help us make much more accurate decisions? So, really, those are the different types of analytics that you need to understand. And during the exam, you might be tested on your understanding of the differences between these analytics. So, it's very important to pay attention to. Let's talk about the roles in data now. What roles are there in data? Now, this is also in the context of the PL-300, just to keep in mind. So, in essence, when we talk about the different roles, there's your business analyst, your data engineer, your analytics engineer, and you got your data scientist. Now, we're going to start with the business analyst. Now, in this context, a business analyst, this is really someone who's close to business and is really responsible for interpreting data visuals to stakeholders, right? They need to have the know-how to sort of explain what the data actually means and what sort of strategies can companies start sort of like planning or deriving in order for them to get to whatever outcome. So the business analysts, they interpret the visuals to business stakeholders. Now, the data analyst, now this is the person responsible for turning that raw data into valuable insights that businesses can use. Those dashboards don't come out of nowhere. The data analyst is the one who builds these dashboards through working with the data from its raw state to a point where it can become a dashboard. Data engineers. Now, the very basic understanding of this one, best way to understand is that a data engineer is really responsible for managing the infrastructure required for data analysis activities. Now, for us as data analysts to be able to work on a data environment, connect different sources of data, pull different sources of data in real time, you need the data engineer to really manage the infrastructure and ensure that everything is working as it should. So that's the role of a data engineer. And you've got your analytics engineer. To be honest, I'm only seeing this now. I've never really seen this one anyway, but it's on the Microsoft sort of course material. So, an analytics engineer, this is really someone who bridges the gap between the data engineer and the data analyst. Because remember, the data engineers build the infrastructure, the data analysts analyze the data. So, it's bringing someone in between to ensure that the data engineers are doing what they should be, that the data analyst essentially requires. I'm not really sure about this role, but it's something that you really have to keep in mind as you write the PL 300. But in the real world, it might not even exist. But some companies, so this is based on company preferences. Maybe this is how would Microsoft would essentially prefer it. Now, data scientist. Now, this is one career or role in data that's really getting sort of like the fame right now. So it's really getting the buzzword, and I think everyone wants to be a data scientist at this point. But it's a very technical area. But my understanding really is this: data scientists build models to make predictions or uncover trends. They don't use tools, they don't build environments. They are focused on essentially developing models that make predictions based on training data, essentially. So that is the data science. Very important to know the difference between this, as you might be tested on them during the exam. Now, tasks of a data analyst. Now, as a data analyst, you are tasked with five things, right? Preparing data, modeling data, visualizing data, analyzing data, and managing data assets, right? So we're going to look at them in detail. When we talk about preparing data, this is when we talk about getting the data, cleaning, transforming your data so that it is ready for the data modeling. That's all that you look at. And there's a whole module around this on the sort of Microsoft PL-300. And I think this just preparing data alone accounts for like 25% of the exam. And modeling data, this is another area that's like 25% of the exam. So this is where you really focus on building relationships between your tables, right? It's about building, connecting your tables and building this entity relationship within your table so that you can really translate insights through communication between different tables. Now, the third one, this is visualizing data. Now, this is where you actually build Power BI dashboards. This is where you tell a story using your data. You paint pictures using your data so that people can actually understand what you're talking about. The fourth one, this is analysis of data. The analysis of data, now you've got your Power BI dashboards or reports. The interpretation or your ability to understand or derive meaning from those visuals, that's the analysis phase. Because from that, you need to give recommendation, you need to answer questions, you need to solve problems. Now, the last one, this is managing data assets. Now, this one really is focused about, because once you've built all these Power BI dashboards, you need to say who gets access, when do they get access, what do they get access to. So there's a lot of different things that sort of Power BI offers for you to sort of manage access or to determine who gets access to certain data sets, because you don't want maybe people accessing people's salaries, or maybe a relevant department seeing some what's the CEO salary, what the executives are earning. You don't want to do that, because as a data analyst, you get exposure to all this very sensitive data. It is your responsibility to protect it and ensure that nothing does not happen to this data. Now, just to close this off, in terms of the learning recap, we looked at what exactly data analysis is. We looked at the types of analysis, we looked at the roles in data. Then we ended off with looking at the tasks a data analyst essentially does. So, in essence, that's the sort of like first subtopic or under discover data analysis. So, in terms of being tested, you'll be tested on whether you understand the types of analytics, the roles in data, and the differences, and what task a data analyst does at what phase. So, essentially, that is what will be required you of this section. So, thank you so much for tuning in. We're definitely going to be moving on to the next episode where we will be covering getting started with Power BI.